Narcissism is an incurable mental disorder, and I am not talking about decent, kind, reasonable liberals.
You've heard people say liberalism is a mental illness. It isn't true the way it sounds, but we'll look at some evidence suggesting a correlation between mental health diagnoses and political beliefs. Then, we'll talk with Democrat advisor and author Naomi Wolf about why she was recently suspended from Twitter for speaking out against vaccine passports and COVID-inspired abuses of political power. And do you think narcissistic personality disorder is rare? Think again. Recent studies suggest the problem may be 3 times more prevalent than it was 30 years ago. All that and more this week on Disaffected.
Progressives of today, who are the fascists of today, say I may disagree with you, but I will kill you rather than let you say another word.
Welcome to Disaffected. I'm Joshua Slocum, and this is the show where we look at culture and politics through a psychological lens, and with a particular focus on abuse dynamics that come from people with cluster B personality disorders, the kind of character that animates abusive parents, abusive domestic partners and spouses, and that are no longer simply confined to the personal sphere and the domestic sphere, but they have begun to structure our public political conversations. And they've begun to structure the conversations in the mainstream left as well. I know I repeat myself, but I know that sometimes some of you are watching this show for the first time. The first few episodes, the first month or so when we did this show, I started it out by saying we're going to look at the abuse dynamics and the personality disorder dynamics that happen in the woke left. But unfortunately, I don't think it's just the woke left anymore. I think it's the mainstream left too. And to repeat a reminder, my thesis, the thesis of this show, is not that most people have personality disorders. My thesis is not that most liberals have personality disorders. Negative. That is not what I'm saying. What I am suggesting is that there is a greater number of people with personality disorders abroad, at large, among us in society today. And I'm going to talk about this in that first segment. I'm going to give you some evidence for that. But that the thing about abuse dynamics and personality disorders. So if you've got a narcissist in a household, mother, father, head of the household, they are not the only person in that household who starts taking on roles in an abuse psychodrama. Everybody in that household is affected by this, and even stable people, people who are not personality disordered, start enacting abuse dynamics with other people around them because of the gravitational orbit of that person who's a narcissistic personality disorder case, a borderline personality disorder case. A lot of the roles that you may be a little bit familiar with when we talk about domestic abuse, things like the scapegoat child, the child of the narcissist who is to blame for everything and takes all the punishment for the narcissist or for the rest of the family members, the golden child who can do no wrong, who the narcissistic parent puts up on a pedestal. These roles are happening in our daily lives and in our public lives too. And I think probably the biggest effect that this is having on our cultural discourse, the conversations that we have with each other, both within sets like the set of liberals, the set of conservatives, the set of libertarians, but particularly liberals. This is being, the biggest influence is the conspiracy of silence and denial that anything is wrong. It's one thing when a person sticks his or her head above the parapet and says, something's not right here. It seems like somebody's not telling the truth. It seems like somebody's on the make. It seems like there's a deeper unspoken agenda here. The first time somebody does that in any conversation or any particular space, most other people are surprised or shocked. That's just the beginning stage, but we're way past the beginning stage now. We're in the thick of it, whatever it is. And there is a conspiracy of silence and denial on the left right now. I've heard it from friends. I've heard it from many more former friends. You see it in the mainstream media. Anybody who questions the political ambitions of Democratic politicians, whether it's about their personal campaign, whether it's about whether we should have vaccine passports, whether we should stay in lockdown, anybody who questions that is, well, they're gaslit by the rest of the people. No, you're crazy. You're exaggerating. It's not that bad. They mean well. How could you imagine that these politicians or our public health officials like Dr. Anthony Fauci, how could you say that they have malicious intent? Why don't you just say maybe they made a mistake or maybe they're following the science? We are well past the initial shock here. People should be able to see this. And I think that a lot of people who say these things, I think they do see it. I think they do. I think they're lying. I think they're denying. I think they are scared. And I understand that because I'm scared too. But their fear is strong enough that it's making them act unethically. And and that's what I want to say about that. Now I want to get into some meat and potato stuff here. Stick around for this show. Obviously, you should stick around for all of it. But in the second segment here, we have an interview with Dr. Naomi Wolf, whom you know is a cultural commentator and the author of 9 books. The first one that she's most well known for is called The Beauty Myth. And we got to talk to her today about her recent Twitter suspension that came pretty much, seems to me, from her speaking out against the dangers of the surveillance state and the totalitarian approach to managing COVID. So there are a couple of articles and studies that have gotten some attention recently about mental health issues and their connections to a person's political orientation. The first one I want to talk about made a little bit of a fuss about a week and a half ago on social media. Let me first say what this is not. This is not an academic study that I'm about to talk about. People have been saying that. It's not a study. This is actually a survey from the Pew Research Center, very large, well-known public polling organization. This is not a study, a survey of self-reported mental illness diagnoses that is pegged to the respondent's political point of view. So let me put up the first image here and show you what this is about. So this is a graph here that shows people according to how they categorize themselves politically. And these are the categories of people that they measured. People who called themselves very liberal, moderate, conservative, or very conservative. So it goes all the way from extreme left to extreme right. And the questions that Pew asked people to answer had to do with whether or not they had ever been told they had a mental illness by a doctor or healthcare provider. Also important to remember, the date when this survey was conducted. This was conducted March 19th through 24, 2020. So it's more than a year old, but keep in mind that it was just at the beginning of the awareness of the COVID pandemic. So that may color the way that some people answered the questions in this survey. So it's not yesterday, it's more than a year ago, March 2020. So the big question that they asked was this: has a doctor or other health care provider ever told you that you have a mental health condition? So it's a yes or no question. And these were the percentage responses from very liberal all the way over to conservative. So, has a doctor or other healthcare provider ever told you that you have a mental health condition? Very liberals, 38% of them said yes. Liberals, 26% said yes. Moderates, 20% said yes. Conservatives, 11% said yes. Very conservative, 15% said yes. So a couple things I want to point out here. This isn't surprising. You see that it's heavily weighted. The results are skewed heavily in terms of people who say that they are very liberal, reporting that they have been diagnosed by a healthcare provider with a mental health condition. But if you go all the way over to the right side, the mirror image there, the very conservatives, although it's less than half of what the very liberals reported, the 15%, they spiked up. Very conservatives answered that 4% higher rate than just conservatives. This is not surprising if we consider that when you take a population, there are extremes, right? If you've got a normal bell curve, that shows where most people fall in the middle, but there are extremes at either end, it shouldn't be surprising when you get over to the very conservative end that you get a slight uptick there too. But it's very lopsided. I mean, it's very heavily on the very liberal side, people reporting that they've had a mental health diagnosis. There's another way to look at the data. Instead of carving it up for that entire spectrum, very liberal, moderate, et cetera, if you collapse those and you look at just three categories of liberal, moderate, or conservative, this is what the data looks like. So asking the same question, has a doctor ever told you that you have a mental health condition? This one is broken out by sex as well. So I'll give it to you that way. So we've got three categories now: liberal, moderate, conservative. And each of them has a different set of answers, whether it's a man or a woman. So, has a doctor ever told you that you have a mental health condition? White liberal women, 46% said yes. This is the 18 to 29 age range. All of these I'm about to give you, 18 to 29 years old. So a little bit different than the general data set that I started out with. White liberal women, 46% said yes. White liberal men, 18 to 29 years of age, 35% said yes. When we get to the moderates, women, 26%, white women, 26%, white moderate men, 26%, so even. White conservative women, 18 to 29 years of age, 21% said they'd been diagnosed with a mental health condition. White conservative men, 18 to 29 years of age, 17% said they had been diagnosed with a mental health condition. So what does this tell us? It doesn't actually tell us a lot. It suggests many things. It opens up many lines of inquiry and conversation. I would love to see somebody run with this and do some drilling down, some research. I can't believe I just said the word drilling down. It's one of those corporate phrases I absolutely hate, and it just flew out of my mouth like that. Apologies. Cancel your donations now. Boycott the show. This got me interested because it's a well-known conservative talking point. Who was it who said this? I think it might have been commentator Michael Savage, and if I'm wrong about that, someone please correct me. But liberalism is a mental illness. That's a glib, provocative thing to say. It certainly gets attention, but it doesn't say a lot. It's a pretty broad generalization. This kind of survey can't tell us exactly what kinds of mental health conditions these people have because it didn't ask for that level of detail. So first of all, what is a mental health condition? Is it anxiety? Is it depression? Is it hallucinations? Is it obsessive compulsive disorder? Is it something in the schizotypal or schizophrenic range, a disconnection from reality, a belief in a false reality that is patently untrue? We can't know that from this. So we can't know exactly what the mental health conditions were. And I'm sure that the survey takers, I mean, Pew is a professional organization. I'm sure that they have ways to control for these things and account for confounding factors. I don't know what those are, but I'm sure that they have them. But I do wonder when I look at this, how much of this self-reporting from survey takers, how many of the responses are just plain, flat, truthful responses, and how many of them are maybe this is what the survey taker wants to hear, right? I can't tell that from this data. So I made a list of questions that could perhaps start to explain what we're seeing here, or at least give us a direction for further research. So what are some of the possibilities that could give us these numbers? Well, it might be that people who are liberal have the kind of personality, the kind of character structure where they are more likely to seek mental health treatment. And people who are more likely to seek out mental health treatment obviously are more likely to be told whether or not they have a mental health condition. So just the fact that you might be more willing than somebody more conservative to see your doctor, to see another healthcare provider and say, I think I might be having mental health problems, that might explain some of it. It might also be that it might be due to the fact that liberals tend to score higher when they do personality tests. I don't mean personality disorder tests. I mean personality tests. There's a construct within psychology called the Big Five personality traits. And these are openness, conscientiousness, agreeableness, neuroticism, and what is the last one? There's an E in there and I'm forgetting. Openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. These are called the Big Five, and it's a very popular way to measure where people fall in these personality traits. It's absolutely standard in mental health research. But the research shows that people who describe themselves as liberal are likely to score higher on measurements of neuroticism. And neuroticism is things like rumination and worry, second guessing yourself. If I'm doing the right thing, am I doing the wrong thing? Is he doing the right thing? Is he doing the wrong thing? I think worry, rumination, to an excessive degree, the more neurotic you are, the more you worry about these things, the more you get into cycles of questioning yourself and self-doubt. That's neuroticism. We all have a level of neuroticism. It's not an indication by itself of having a personality disorder or not having a personality disorder, but liberals score higher on neuroticism. I score very high on neuroticism, even though I'm less of a liberal than I used to be. That hasn't changed. Another possibility, maybe people who are liberal are more likely to claim a mental health diagnosis for other reasons. Maybe that's doing something for them that isn't apparent on the surface. And maybe people who are more conservative are less likely to claim it, or maybe conservatives are more likely to deny that they have ever been diagnosed with a mental health condition. I don't know if this is true, but these are all very plausible possibilities. And the one that I'm most interested in seeing somebody do some research on, what about the possibility that those who have more mental illness, not just self-reported, but that we could actually describe as legitimately having higher levels of mental illness or more mental illnesses, what if such people tend to self-select into liberal political beliefs? I don't know if that's true across the board, and I don't know how we would find out, because I don't know I don't think the research has been done. Maybe it has been done. I think that may be true for some people, though, and I think it was to some extent true for me. I've told you before on this show that I have had mental health issues most of my life, and I'm pretty candid about that. I think I have to be, because if I'm going to be talking about other people's mental health all the time, it's kind of obnoxious to pretend that one is above and beyond it. Actually, I'm not even motivated to pretend that I'm outside of it, because part of the purpose of this show is helping people to understand what the effect is of living with a person with a severe personality disorder like my mother. My mother has borderline and narcissistic personality disorders, and at times has displayed psychopathic traits. I don't think she's a global psychopath, but I do think that she has the kind of borderline personality disorder that more easily lends itself to psychopathic acting out than some other people do. And the mental health issues that I've had, I would say, are almost entirely due to the extreme child abuse that happened in my home to me and to my brother and sister, that I compounded myself when I was no longer living in the home, but I was living my life as a traumatized kid who had not worked these issues out and who engaged in a lot of self-harming behavior, excessive drug taking, excessive drinking, partying hard, the club scene and the promiscuous sex scene that so many young gay men find themselves falling into. I lived my life that way for quite a long time. And these are all classic behaviors and classic self-destructive patterns that happen to abused children. And over the course of my many trips to the doctor and various therapists over the years, I've been diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder, panic disorder. And panic disorder is characterized by, I realize I haven't defined that before. Everybody knows what obsessive compulsive disorder is. Panic disorder is when you have panic attacks, and these are extreme acute bouts of anxiety. It's not just nervousness, it's extreme. Your whole body is shaking, you hyperventilate. Sometimes you actually do something called depersonalizing and derealization. You feel like you're somewhere outside of your body, and the world around you begins to feel like it isn't real. It's hard to explain more than that, but if you've ever felt this emotion, you understand what it feels like. So panic disorder is when a person has panic attacks that apparently come out of nowhere. When I had, and thankfully this is not characteristic of me day to day anymore, the obsessive compulsive disorder and the panic disorder are so minimal compared to where they were used to be. There is hope. If this is you, if you suffer from these things, it can and does get better. I promise. But these things are, in my view, better seen, rather than seeing them as illnesses in and of themselves or as standalone syndromes, I now understand them as symptoms of an underlying problem. And I think that underlying problem is what's called complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Very, very common with victims of long-standing child and domestic abuse. It's post-traumatic stress disorder, but it doesn't come from an acute and extreme situation like serving in wartime or being at the site of a massacre or having or being in a plane crash. That classic PTSD usually shows itself. Complicated post-traumatic stress disorder shows up in people who have been basically captive, who've been prisoner to an abusive spouse and abusive parent over a long period of time, in which there was no realistic hope of escape. And that's what describes child abuse, right? If you grow up in a household with a personality disordered abusive parent, there is no escape for that child. The only escape that comes is when the child gets kicked out of the home, like I was between 12 and 13, put into an institution in a group home with boys, criminals, by the way, which I was not. So that's complicated post-traumatic stress disorder. And when I think about my change in political perspective over the years, my moving away from leftism and the kind of liberalism that I used to support, and having my views change to include more conservative points of view, more libertarian points of view, or more classical liberal points of view, I know that it's true for me that a lot of what kept me in democratic and leftist politics was a sense of myself as a victim. A sense of myself as a victim, but seeing other people who I thought were like me as victims. So victims of outside forces, right? And it's perverse. For a very long time, I couldn't identify my actual captor, my mother, right? Everybody else was my enemy, but not my actual enemy. I know that sounds melodramatic, but I was a prisoner of my mother, both as a child who, couldn't leave home, but in my mind, I was enslaved to my mother's deranged point of view and her inverted and deranged value system. I did not know reality from fantasy half the time. And when I got out of that situation, I continued to carry a chip on my shoulder, because living in a household like that teaches you to mistrust, to see danger in places where there aren't danger, but it also blinds you from seeing danger where danger really actually exists. So a lot of it it makes you misidentify the targets, right? And as time has gone on, as I have resolved more of my mental issues that came from my background of child abuse, as I got into therapy, real, useful, long-term, years-long therapy, that actually digs at the real root of the trauma and the real distortions of how you see yourself, my sense of myself as a victim has gone down and down and down and down. And concomitantly, my view of other people as victims of a big, hateful, homophobic system, misogynistic system, racist system, my willingness to believe that uncritically, which I did believe before, has gone down commensurately. So to the extent that there are people out there like me who are liberals, and who have a background of abuse, I could well imagine that that abusive background, that conceiving of yourself as a victim and seeing the people around you that you love as victims of outside forces, I think certainly does contribute to self-selecting into liberal politics. And it doesn't necessarily need to be that way. There are ways to be a liberal that are not the ways that are available to us in contemporary American culture. Being a liberal does not have to mean that you see yourself primarily as a victim and everybody else as an oppressor. But that is what it's become today. So that's the kind of liberalism that I've moved away from. Anyway, I hope you found that interesting. But again, just to put a fine point on it, this was not a study. It did not show that being a liberal is a form of mental illness. It is a suggestive opening of avenues of inquiry to see what the correlation is between political orientation and the state of one's own mental health. The next thing I want to talk about is the rise in narcissism, both as a personality trait and as a full-blown disorder. And I've hit on this in other shows, and I'm going to hit on it in future shows. But I read a very interesting paper that was published in 2013 that I want to tell you about. The title of the paper is "The Evidence for Generation Me and Against Generation We." It was published in the first edition of a journal called Emerging Adulthood, so published in 2013 in Volume 1 of Emerging Adulthood. And the author is Jean M. Twenge, and I don't know if I got her name right. I'm going to spell her first and last name for you. Jean, Jean, middle initial M as in Mary, last name Twenge. And what she found in this article, what she discusses, were 5 studies looking at trying to measure the level of narcissistic traits in survey respondents over several decades. So she pulled out 5 that looked at both the broad American population, but also college student populations, starting in the 1980s and going up through the 2010s. And one sentence that she wrote near the beginning of the article really grabbed me, and it says, you know, it's so interesting. Have I talked about this before? No, I don't think I've said this on the show before, so I'll set this up for you. I think I have noticed over the past 30 years that a lot of things we call manners, etiquette, and ways of living in the world that show respect to the people around you, that these things have been declining. And I think that I've noticed that people in general, overall, behave more self-centeredly than they used to. I know that all old people say this, and being 46 years old, to anyone under 30, I am old people. So yes, I know old people always say, get off my lawn, things were better when I was a kid. I realize that, and I'm sure that to some degree that's animating me. But I will not concede that that is the sum total of why I feel this way. It is not. I believe I have noticed something accurate. It's not merely that I don't know how the youth live anymore. I think we actually are more self-centered. I think that over the years, things like obeying simple road rules have declined. People don't take correct turns at stop signs anymore. I told you a few episodes ago about that incident in the parking lot. No, actually, it was on another show. People don't return shopping carts as much as they used to. Yeah, I know. It sounds real small. I think these small things are tells. I don't think they're actually small. People are more aggressive. They're more demanding. They're more entitled. even the way people make telephone calls these days is much, much ruder than what I was taught to do on the phone. And despite my mother being a crazy borderline and narcissist, she did actually teach us kids correct and proper manners, how to be respectful. When you call somebody on the phone, you identify yourself first. You say, "Hi, this is Josh Slocum calling. Is Lisa available?" Right? This is so drummed into me that even though we have phones today that instantly show who we are most of the time, unless someone's not in your phone, I still do that. And sometimes people are like, "You sound so old-fashioned." Yeah, you might want to try it. You don't get that anymore. I mean, people just call them and say, "Hey, yeah, I'll blah, 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 blah." Who are you? Who are you? Or, I love this, which means I hate it. I get this constantly, and I bet you get this constantly too. You pick up the phone. "Hello. Yeah, is Josh there?" Who's calling? Don't make me ask you that. Don't ask for me before you identify who you are. I get it from my doctor's office. I get it from the car dealer. I get it from people who call at work who are looking for me. You know, these little things like this. So I think that Jean Twenge here, I shouldn't try to say her last name because I'm probably screwing it up, has found some actual evidence that this is really going on. So she looked at 5 different papers or studies. The first one found that twice as many students answered in a narcissistic way in a survey. That's a bad way to describe this. Let me attack it from another angle. One survey and one study looked at students who answered a certain set of questions in the year 1982, and then another set of college students who answered the same set of questions in 2009. So that's a difference of more than 30 years. And this study found they were using something called the Narcissistic Personality Inventory, which is a psychological assessment tool to find narcissistic traits. Note carefully, the Narcissistic Personality Inventory is not a diagnostic tool for narcissistic personality disorder. It can't rule it in or rule it out. It can give suggestions. So it's not measuring specifically diagnosable levels of NPD, the disorder, but it is measuring narcissistic traits. Yes, certainly some of the people in that survey would go on to qualify for NPD, but that's not what this does. Looking for the inventory of narcissistic traits. So twice as many students answered in a way that indicated a higher level of narcissism in 2009 than they did in 1982. The next study she looked at found that students from the University of South Alabama, starting in 1994, and then a set of students in 2009 answering the same set of questions. By 2009, the students in the survey scored a third of a standard deviation higher on the Narcissistic Personality Inventory than they had in 1994. In the next one, looked at college students and found that they started first in 1986, then they assessed using the same tool in 2008. And they found that the college students scored higher on what they call narcissism items, indicators of narcissism in 2008 compared to 1986. The fourth one found similar results in a study across students in the University of California system more broadly and statewide. And finally, this one really jumps out at me. Listen to this. This is some serious evidence for the rise of narcissistic personality disorder. The National Institutes of Health asked a national sample of 35,000 American adults whether they had certain symptoms. And this wouldn't have been known. The survey takers, the respondents, would not necessarily know what the goal was behind these questions. But that would be known to the researchers. Excuse me. The first time around they did this study, and I'm sorry, I thought I'd put this down on my notes, but I didn't, so I can't tell you the spread of years. But it was similar to, in the 80s versus the 2000s. The first time around in this set of 35,000 American adults, nope, I just answered my own question. I got to give myself a correction here, folks. One study, 35,000 American adults, broken down by age. So we're talking generational differences here. Only 3% of the people in the survey, in the study, who were 65 years of age and older, only 3% of them gave answers that indicated that they probably had narcissistic personality disorder. 3 times as many young people in their 20s gave answers that indicated the presence of full-blown diagnosable narcissistic personality disorder. 9.4% of respondents in their 20s compared to only 3% in age 65 and older. And this certainly correlates with what I and other people have noticed anecdotally. When you look at and you can do this if you're interested, just go on Google or DuckDuckGo or whoever you use and just type in rate of personality disorders, rate of cluster B personality disorders, rate of narcissistic personality disorder. You'll get the standard stats that you usually see quoted in newspaper and media articles when they write about this topic. These are we take it all at face value, like this is the official numbers. We can trust these just as much as we can trust somebody who says the rate of teen smoking is X% in 2018. I don't think we can trust these numbers anymore because they haven't been updated to reflect this reality. You will generally see that the estimates that come out of mental health publications and studies that are cited on therapy websites, halfway house websites, substance abuse, addiction support groups say, maybe 1% of the population has narcissistic personality disorder, or 1% of the population has antisocial personality disorder, which is just a bureaucrat's name for psychopathy. With borderline personality disorder, I frequently see an estimate of between 2 and 3%. These don't ring true to me. And I realize that I'm just I have a set of anecdotes in my head. I'm one man. I'm not a survey. But I just don't believe it. This seems much more believable to me, this 9.4% of people in this survey of 35,000 adults in their 20s. I do think there's a huge generational difference. I do think it has something to do with helicopter parenting. I do think it has something to do with self-esteem parenting. The interesting thing about what creates narcissistic personality disorder in people is that it can look contradictory. You can see families where a child is severely abused, told they're stupid, they're worthless, they're ugly, they're crazy, and that abuse almost always comes from a parent with a cluster B personality disorder. They can be treated very negatively, can be treated like dog shit by their parents, and they can grow up to be a grandiose narcissist with a case of full-blown narcissistic personality disorder. But the exact opposite treatment seems to be just as able to create narcissistic personality disorder. Kids who are overvalued, children whose parents tell them that they are special, they are more special than other people. You can do anything you want, you can be anything you want, you are the most special kid in the world, kids who get participation trophies. Children who are bigged up and praised no matter how well or how poorly they put an effort into their academic performance, their socializing at home. No matter what, they're just bigged up and they're given praise and they're given prizes. That appears to be just as effective at creating a personality disorder, a narcissistic personality disorder in children, as the opposite is, as the extreme mistreatment is. I'm going to be keeping my eye out to see more work done on this, because I think we're starting to get at it. And now I want to take you into an example from media and social media, as I always do. We've talked a little bit on this show about critical race theory, or CRT. And critical race theory is the idea that has infested the academic left, the social sciences, the soft sciences, the cultural institutions, who claim that there's such a thing as white privilege, that there's something called whiteness, which is a pathological condition, You see this all over the place. Now, if you have not seen this, go online. Start searching some of the terms you hear me say. If this is surprising to you, I want you to know that it's only surprising to you because you haven't been paying attention. This is everywhere. And no, it's not just a little corner of Twitter. It's in the New York Times. It's getting into public school systems across the country. I've seen at least 3 or 4 videos over the past few weeks in states across the country where parents are waking up to this and attending school board meetings and are angry that their children are being taught that something called whiteness is a malignancy or something toxic, that values such as punctuality, hard work, getting the correct answer. Critical race theorists call these traits components of white supremacy. I know it sounds crazy. I know it sounds ridiculous. You're right, it is crazy and ridiculous. But it's not me saying it that's crazy or ridiculous. They are actually saying these things. These things are getting into public school and private school curricula. You can read about it in the mainstream media with a heavy slant, because, of course, anybody who objects to this is a racist. This is the trick they pull with critical race theory, folks. And critical race theory, I'm not going to do a huge breakdown, but I want to give you a couple places where you can learn more about it. One of the people who has got the best handle on this is somebody named James Lindsay. I've mentioned him before. He's a mathematician who lives in Tennessee. He's become one of the most outspoken academic critics of critical race theory in the country, and he's actually lent his voice to legislative efforts. We did a show several months ago where he was testifying to a House committee in New Hampshire that had a bill that would ban critical race theory teaching in public schools. James has researched this and has dedicated most of his free time and probably a lot of his professional time to this. And his website is newdiscourses.com. He's got plain language primers on all of these concepts with examples, so you can educate yourself about what's really going on here by starting there. And it's not just that it's in public school curricula, it's that it is in every magazine that's even slightly left. It's structuring work groups. It's being pushed on employees of organizations like Lockheed, Coca-Cola. It's everywhere. And it's in National Geographic. Boy, that magazine has gone downhill. I'm going to show you some pictures from National Geographic that they put up on their social media. And this is called the Race Card Project. The first thing I saw about this was a tweet from podcaster Benjamin Boyce. Benjamin, we don't know each other, but thank you. This cracked me up, but it also got me to dig a little bit deeper. So I noticed a tweet from Benjamin where he'd screen capped a tweet from National Geographic, and Benjamin Boyce said, through a glass wokely. And he characterized National Geographic's Race Card Project as all grievance, no celebration. What is the Race Card Project? Don't you love the name, Race Card? So, let me get my borderline glasses so I can read to you. All right. So for those of you listening who don't have video, this is a tweet from National Geographic. There are 6 pictures of people staring into the camera in the first of this series of tweets. And National Geographic says, 10 years ago, Michelle Norris launched the Race Card Project, which asks people to describe their feelings on race in just 6 words. She thought few would respond. Here are some of the responses out of 500,000 so far that she's received. Couple of things here. Disingenuous, lying. Michelle Norris did not expect to receive a few responses. That's just a blatant lie. She knew exactly what she was going to get. That's why she did this. This is how these people operate. This is red meat to liberals these days. There's no way she was only going to get a few responses. This is red meat to the aggrieved. and people who want to be saviors to the aggrieved and victimized. Michelle Norris used to be the host of All Things Considered for a while on National Public Radio, and she's one of the people. She's one of the people that I'm mocking when I affect this voice. Michelle Norris has mommy tone. She speaks to you on National Public Radio really, really close to your ear in such a way that, you know, it sounds a little bit like she's your mommy and she's going to sing you to sleep, but also like she's your mistress who's trying to seduce you. Michelle Norris. Ugh. Please, please, please bring back Linda Wertheimer. So, let's look at some of the people who sent in their race card to National Geographic, shall we? Remember, the conceit here is send a picture of yourself, tell the story of how you've suffered for your race in 6 words or less. So, first image here. Young man looks to be between 25 and 30, brown-skinned. You might call him black, you might call him Middle Eastern. You wouldn't call him white, but any more specific than that, you would know just to look. He's standing there on a snowy street, looking at the camera. Boy, I'm telling you, if you're listening to this episode when you get a chance, go back to Rumble or anywhere that we're on video and look at it, because you really have got to see the expression on these people's faces. Looking into the camera. And under each of these race cards is a second tweet that gives a little caption. This one is called, his race card, this is what he wrote. Black boy, white world, perpetually exhausted. You've heard that, I know you have. I'm just exhausted. I'm so tired. It's exhausting. What are you exhausted about? I'm just exhausted for just trying to exist as a woman in a misogynistic world. I'm just exhausted from having to fend off all the right-wing trolls. I'm just exhausted. I'm exhausted. I'm exhausted. Yes, you're so very put upon. You're like Atlas and you can't shoulder the burden of the world. A lot of people are a lot more exhausted than they have any right to be. So the explanation for black boy, white world, perpetually exhausted, National Geographic says, after a frightening encounter with police right before entering college, Isaias Muretab decided not to tell his parents, who had fled persecution in Ethiopia, but he discovered that keeping quiet about these challenges takes a toll. What frightening encounter? What's the detail? What's the context? You know what we're supposed to believe, right? And I'm not supposed to ask these questions. I'm supposed to simply say, no wonder he's exhausted. Let me make you a warm cup of cocoa. We're supposed to believe that this, quote, frightening encounter with police was an example of racist mistreatment of him because of the color of his skin. But we're given no further information. We have to take it on faith. And we're supposed to also believe that keeping quiet about these challenges takes a toll. I doubt this man has been quiet for a day in his life. Any of these people. Give me a break. They never shut up about it. Next one. This is a portrait of a man who appears to be about 50 years old. He appears to be mixed race, perhaps partially. He had one parent with light white skin, one parent with brown skin. He's got dreadlocks. He's wearing a handkerchief on the back of his head. And he is wearing a Black Panthers sweatshirt. So, it's got the portrait, and here's his 6 words for the race card. With kids, I'm dad. Alone, thug. Really? And here's the caption. People in his affluent neighborhood on the coast of Central California were friendly enough when ultrasound technician Mark Quarles was accompanied by his wife, who is white and German, and their mixed-race children. But the reception was always much less friendly when he was alone. Was it? Again, we're supposed to simply take this on faith, just like National Geographic has. Yes, I'm sure that the people in his affluent neighborhood on the coast of Central California, I'm sure that is a teeming hotbed of crypto racists. California? Are you kidding me? So the claim here is that people were nice to him when he has his white German wife and his mixed race kids, and they see him as dad. But when he's alone, they think he's a thug. First of all, without more information, how do I know that's true? And if they do, I don't even know what to think about this. I don't think the guy looks like a thug. And I'm not sure I believe that he knows that other people thought that about him. But what I would think if I saw him, he's a guy who's 50 years old. He's middle-aged, who's dressed kind of like a teen guy, right? The long dreadlocks, the kerchief over the back of his hair. This is fine. He may do this. All I'm saying is that, yes, this is more typical dress of younger people. And the Black Panthers sweatshirt? I don't know. I don't know. I don't think he looks like a thug, but I do think he looks like the kind of guy that I would expect spends most of his day smoking weed and hanging out with people who are far too young for him because he's not very mature himself. That's probably the first visual impression I'd get. Who can say? Let's go on to the next one. I love the expression on the faces of these few people coming up. So here's a young woman who appears to be about 25 years old. Again, appears to be mixed race. Light, coffee-colored skin, long curly hair. You probably wouldn't think she was white. You'd probably think she's something other than your standard issue European American, but just what, I'm not sure. And she's standing there looking at the camera with that, you know what? You know who wears that expression on her face? Demi Lovato. Remember when I talked about people who wear their mouths upside down? And this is an example of it. It's the look on their face. It's like this. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit. When I do this, it's like, think of drawing a caricature. You recognize people from a caricature because the features that are distinctive about them are exaggerated. They're way more exaggerated than they are in real life. But that instantly tells you that's Lucille Ball, that's Charlie Chaplin, that's Madonna. That's what caricatures do. That's what I'm kind of trying to do when I do these impressions. It's sort of like, it's a look of aggrieved sullenness. Like, I'm standing here for you, but I shouldn't have to. Shouldn't have to. What now? She's exhausted. She's got I'm exhausted. So the caption, her race card, I am not an exotic creature. And the caption says, Hannah Peoples said the constant guessing game about her identity, as well as the harassment and unwanted attention she's received from, quote, creepy men, makes her feel like a specimen. Her 6-word story was born of exasperation. No, I think it was born of an attitude problem. I am not an exotic creature. You know what I think? I think she means the opposite. I think she wants to be seen as an exotic creature. I think that's what this is really about. No, I'm not saying that she wants to be fetishized and treated as exotic because she doesn't look prototypically European American. I think she finds herself very, very special. And I think that she very much wants you to find her very special. She wants individualized attention, and she gets it this way. I'm not an exotic creature. But you clearly want people to think that you are. Maybe not that kind of exotic creature, but another kind. Yeah, you do. The constant guessing game about her identity, what does that even mean? Does she know the minds of everybody around her? Does she know what they're thinking? Because she's probably sitting there, as so many people of this type do, claiming that everyone around her is like, when people ask me where I'm from, and I say I'm from Brooklyn, and they don't believe me, bullshit. Bullshit. First of all, people aren't asking you that all the time. I know I'm a white guy, so people wouldn't ask me that. But I'm also observant, and I've met thousands and thousands of other human beings in my life. I've talked with them. I've sat in cafes where I overheard their conversations. I've noticed other people in line at the bank or the convenience store. I'm an observant person. I've watched other humans for my entire life. And I do not believe these claims from people like this. People who say, well, I'm a person of color and everyone is constantly asking me where I'm really from. No, they're not. Some people did, sure, but not nearly the deluge that these people claim. This is not something that's constant and happening to you every day. That isn't true. Besides which, to the extent that these conversations do come up, what's wrong with asking somebody where they're from? If somebody comes up to you and speaks in heavily accented English, you're having a business transaction with them, you're being friendly with them, one of the normal friendly things that humans do with each other to establish an initial social bond, a friendly bond, and when they haven't met each other before, is to talk about each other. Say, hey, where are you from? Notice your accent. Where do you come from originally? What's your mother tongue? I'm interested in that sort of thing. I'm not going to ask everybody. I mean, frankly, these days, I daren't ask anybody, even the most polite question this way for fear that they're going to have a meltdown. But that is not an example of somebody trying to have a constant guessing game about my identity or to say that you're not a real American. Sometimes it's just called small talk, being friendly. Enough for her. Let's move on to the next one. Oh, what a treat. Where am I? I don't have the soundboard up today, Kevin. I wanted to hit the borderline chimes. Next race card. This is a white woman. Appears to be 25, 28 years old. Standing there in this affected pose. She's got an undercut and she's got the side of her hair shaved off, but the rest of her hair is long and flops over to the other side. She's got borderline glasses. She's got dark red lipstick. And she's got that sullen, challenging look on her face. I really, really hate that look. I recognize that look. I know you can tell what kind of interaction you're likely to have with a person when they walk up to you with that look on their face. If you're watching and you can see this on video, that again, it's a little bit bored, it's a little bit put out, and it's sullen, and it's a little bit aggressive. It's challenging. It's looking at the camera like, I've got a chip on my shoulder, and I dare you to notice that I have a chip on my shoulder. I have seen people in real life do this many, many times. And when I've had to interact with them, the attitude that comes out of their mouth exactly matches the look on their face. They are trouble. So her race card, Jesus Christ. I'm ashamed for my ancestors' race. That's mighty white of you, honey. Here's the caption. Lindsay Lovell Hedrick was born in Arkansas, and her ancestors ran a small plantation in Georgia and owned slaves. I'm sorry. It sounds so normal. Her ancestors ran a small bed and breakfast in Georgia and had slaves. Okay, so her ancestors ran a small plantation in Georgia and owned slaves. Quote, when I try and bring things up or I try and criticize the South, it's never gone over great with my family. Oh, I'm sure you're a fucking laugh riot at Thanksgiving, Lindsay. Right? Because you know what? At Thanksgiving, you're not only badgering your aunts and uncles and your grandparents about their complicity in slavery, because they dared to, have ancestors who did a terrible thing. You're probably lecturing the shit out of everybody else there who's eating the turkey and wondering where your tofurkey is. I know you, Lindsay. I've met a million of you. You are a dime a dozen. They stamp you out from a mold at a factory. That's the end of this segment, folks. Stay with us because when we come back, we are going to talk to Naomi Wolf herself. See you on the other side. Hey, listeners, guess what? We're on Patreon now. Bringing you this show costs money. Would you chip in to help? Go to patreon.com/disaffected. That's patreon.com/DISAFFECTED. Thank you. Thanks so much for listening. would you take just a minute right now and share our show on social media? On Disaffected, we take a close look every week at the abuse dynamics exploding in the dark and disordered world that we live in. Tell other people about us. Welcome back. You'll remember a couple episodes ago, a tweet by cultural commentator and author Naomi Wolf caught my eye. And I'll read it to you again. So she said, "Disorienting AF, meaning as fuck. I'm meeting a lot of conservatives, libertarians, and I like them. Former are ladies and gentlemen and very hospitable. The latter are a pleasure as they don't try to control your opinions or actions. What to do? I was trained to fear and dread non-liberals." Well, we have Dr. Naomi Wolf herself here to talk about that tweet and what became of it and why she's now suspended from Twitter. So, Naomi, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much for
On this show, we look at politics and culture through a psychological lens, and sort of our thesis here is that interpersonal dynamics that are characterized by treating people abusively are really no longer confined to the spheres that we expect to see them in, you know, things like child abuse, domestic abuse, interpersonal stuff, but that it's exploded out into our culture and is characterized, a better way to say it, a lot of the polarization and the divide between people who think of themselves as on the left and on the right has gotten so extreme that the reason why your tweet caught my eye is that I'm somebody who spent most of my life on the left. I was a very partisan Democrat. My political views have been changing over the past 5 years, but I have felt, along with a number of people that I know, that changing my political opinions is not welcome. But I also noticed it's not welcome from the place I used to sort of live on the left, but I have noticed that as I got to know more people on the right, I had a lot of stereotyped views of them that didn't turn out to be true. So that's kind of what interested me. I was wondering, could you elaborate a little bit on what you meant in that tweet and what your political positions, what you're thinking about in terms of politics and the divide between the left and the right?
Sure. Thank you. These are, such timely, important questions in some ways that they're the most important questions of our moment here in the United States at this point in history, because divisions between us politically are being weaponized and heightened kind of artificially for reasons that we can get into. But you're absolutely right that, Bill, I have not changed. Like you feel you've evolved. I actually feel I haven't really evolved. But as Reagan said, I didn't leave the Democratic Party. It left me. I'm still a Democrat. I still see myself as a classical liberal. Well, I guess I should say at this point I'm an independent until
so do I.
There's a reawakening. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's you.
But the world around me has changed so that I do see, people I love, colleagues and friends I've had forever who I thought, on the left, who I thought believed as I did, as the liberal position has always been since the 19th century. We all believed in free speech, free exchange of ideas, tolerance, diversity, inclusiveness, right? Human rights. And it's been shocking for me, especially since November of last year, since the Biden election. It's been shocking to see my team on the left really close down so dramatically and tolerate mass platforming of conservative voices on social media, the deplatforming of a former president for 2 years. I don't like him. I didn't vote for him. But, it's very serious if an American president is deplatformed, or anyone is deplatformed from Facebook for their views, for not threatening violence, but for their views. I'm seeing less and less willingness. Like, I was just interviewed by by the Sunday Times of London, and I was asked, well, why are you talking to Tucker Carlson? Why are you talking to Steve Bannon? I remember an America in which people who didn't agree with each other at all regularly spoke to each other, because that's how democracy works, and that's how journalism works, or should work. So that's what I've been increasingly uncomfortable with. At the same time, since I've been sounding the alarm since the pandemic began about how the pandemic, or now the endemic, is being used to as a cover real, formerly very real crisis, less and less, statistically as serious now, but still, very real thing. It's been weaponized to, in my view, and I've been writing and reporting about this a lot, subjugate American liberties, Western liberties. I think it's being used as an attack on the West. I think a lot of bad actors are exploiting it. The upshot of that is that, to my horror, conservative and libertarian institutions were like, Naomi, come share this message. And my usual haunts, CNN, the New York Times, Guardian, like all the places I hang out and where I was a media darling for many decades, do not want to talk about it, want to attack me, if I do come up, and extraordinarily are casting, preserving our Constitution, our freedoms, our symbol, freedom of speech, as like right wing or libertarian. Bizarre. And then I'll just wrap up, the kind of personal comment in the tweet, as a result of people saying, come talk to us, in the libertarian world and on the left. I'm sorry, on the right, that was a slip. I've of course met a lot of human beings who are conservative and libertarian, and I kind of knew this because my job has taken me all over the country, and I try not to have stereotypes, but it is just the data are in lovely people, not like the stereotype on the left of what every conservative is that they are most motivated by homophobia or transphobia, mostly racist, mostly want to shut down women's right to reproductive choice personally. And I'm not saying those views don't exist, but I am saying that, just as the left is demonized to the right as baby killers, mostly motivated by wanting to, abort babies, wanting to, burn Bibles and destroy, etc. These are stereotypes. So that, and they're stereotypes that are very dangerous at this time. That's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, it sounds very reasonable to me, because I think I'm observing the same things that you're observing. And I want to talk particularly about COVID protocols, lockdowns, and floating the idea of vaccine passports. I find all of these extraordinarily alarming. And I see what appears to me to be an absolute lockstep agreement on the left that these things are not alarming, but they're in fact absolutely necessary for safety, particularly, things like vaccine passports. And I know that you're concerned about this as well. What do you chalk this up to, Naomi? When you try to explain to yourself, how is it that people, colleagues, scientists, cultural commentators on the left, where I've been, how do they not see the authoritarian and totalitarian implications of this? How do you explain that? Do you? Because I'm having a hard time.
It's a very good question. My life right now is a kind of a case in point, that speaks directly to what you're raising. I was massively attacked starting a few days ago globally, and erroneously. A lot of news outlets, formerly reputable ones like Yahoo, but all the way down to Business Insider, misinformed millions of people that I'd been deplatformed from Twitter for giving vaccine misinformation and conspiracy theories.
Ugh.
It's not true. Here's why I was deplatformed. But
yeah, what was it specifically that got you?
Sure. So on Saturday, I posted a 2-minute video of my husband, Brian O'Shea, who's a private investigator and has had a long career formerly in military intelligence. So he's a very good researcher. And he posted the CV of Dr. Ralph Barrick, who's in the news, as he should be, because, of course, Anthony Fauci had told Congress that Fauci and the NIH had never funded gain-of-function research. I mean, you're not supposed to lie to Congress. Perjury, it's a felony. But Brian, found Dr. Barrick's CV, and Dr. Barrick identifies over $14 million in funding from the NIH, and identifies it as gain of function research. And also on his CV is Xijing Li, the quote unquote bat lady, the scientist at the Wuhan lab, who, is now confirmed to have brought infected bats from 800 miles away to the Wuhan lab. So she's at the center of concerns that have been dismissed as conspiracy theories for 14 months that, that this was a lab leak, and as Dr. Fauci was warned, a possible bioweapon. So I also tweeted very correctly, having gone through Dr. Fauci's emails, I tweeted, and having worked as been a White House for a couple of years, having worked as an advisor to the Clinton re-election campaign, as an advisor to the Vice President Al Gore, I know how the White House works. When Dr. Fauci received not one but two emails from scientists in early 2020 warning that the virus looks like engineered, in the words of one, Christian Anderson, and calling it a, quote, bioweapon, in the words of another. That should have been the moment that Dr. Fauci dropped everything, went to the White House, went to the chief of staff of the president, and told the chief of staff about this, so that the chief of staff could alert the Pentagon and the State Department of a possible biosecurity threat against the people of the United States of America. But he did not do that. At least none of the emails show it. And Peter Navarro is very clear after I read. Peter Navarro is very clear today in the Washington Times that, as he put it, Dr. Fauci has blood on his hands because he did not do it. Rather, he went through the back door and legalized gain of function research and covered up these warnings, and spend the next 14 months telling us to stay indoors, keeping our kids out of school, told us to wear face masks that he said himself to correspondents were not effective, rather than warning
yes, he did.
the right channels that, this could be a bioweapon, it could be a lab leak. So I posted that. And lastly, I posted a video in which I read verbatim a press release from the state senator, Kim Thatcher of Oregon, about her Bill 872 to ban vaccine passports and mask mandates. At that point, I was deplatformed. So all those things came true. I warned about the spike protein causing inflammation. All over the news today is the fact that the CDC is belatedly, months after I warned about it, calling an emergency meeting because there's higher than expected rates of heart inflammation among young men. All of my reporting is primary source reporting. It's government documents. It's 100% accurate. It's what journalists should be doing. And it's all being confirmed as absolutely what all journalists in America should have been raising, because these are, very serious problems. If Dr. Fauci, covered up alerts of a bioweapon, if the CDC didn't let people know that there were, reports from credible scientists of possible inflammation, and so on. So that's why I was deplatformed, which is pretty depressing.
It's depressing, and it's amazing, and it's also sinister. I mean, we can all see Fauci's emails. I mean, what you're pointing to, these documents are accessible to all of us. I can read the same things you're reading. Anybody on Twitter can read these same things. What do you make? Why is it, do you suppose, that so many people on the left are so hostile to that? They're hostile to people like you, who is a member of their social and political set. They certainly, in my life, have been hostile to me. I've spent most of my life being on the left, and maybe I had my eyes closed before, but I never before noticed people absolutely, almost religiously unable and unwilling to hear this, and not only not willing to hear facts or not willing to hear uncomfortable questions about things that are very weighty matters for us as citizens, but treating those of us who mention these things as if we've committed a moral sin. What do you chalk that up to? Leave aside Dr. Fauci,
Sure.
Leave aside people in politics. Let's just talk about the people on the left. Just regular people that you go to parties with, people that you have lunch with. Where is this hostility coming from?
So thank you, Josh, for following up, and forgive me, I didn't actually answer that question.
No, it's okay, because there's so much to talk about. But
okay.
it really baffles me.
Yeah, I have some insights. So first of all, the people kind of producing what the culture of the left should be has changed in the last 20 years, I would say. The left in the 1960s used to be, in the 50s, Ginsburg, right? Free speech, freedom of expression, all the great writers who were targets of censorship, they were on the left. The hippie movement, the free speech movement in the 60s, the civil rights movement, this was all about human rights, the Constitution, freedom of expression. In the last, and as you say, like these are not our values. Our values,
right? Liberal
values involve freedom of expression, human rights. That's how they were articulated back to Mill, back to the revolutions of 1848. I mean, this is classical liberalism. It's freedom of expression. It's not dogmatic. It's against suppression and cultishness and, reflexive fundamentalism. Well, there is a lot of documentation that the Chinese Communist Party has been kind of, I would just say infiltrating and commodifying the left in various ways. Certainly there's been a great deal of documentation of their influence on universities. And I know that in the last 10 or 15 years, the left's discourse has become more and more like that. And one mom who's a Chinese American, an immigrant from communist China, was very eloquent about this in a school board meeting recently. The techniques and technologies of cultural change of the Chinese Communist Revolution, shaming, deplatforming, if you like, silencing, group dismissal.
Struggle sessions.
Exactly. Well, I used to dismiss that phrase political correctness as an exaggeration, but we are seeing Marxist, I'm not like cool Marxist, I'm the daughter of someone who was a communist for a while, but real Stalinist, real CCP type cultural change being imposed very cleverly, I think, on the left. And it's to weaken America, and it's to get a foothold into this country culturally. And that can be another conversation. But, again, I've seen great deal of primary source documentation from my husband who's working on this and his colleagues. And there's vast millions flowing from the Chinese Communist Party to buy up our news, to buy up our influencers, to establish, think tanks, and often the money flows through existing brands. So add to that Bill Gates, right? He has been flowing money to have only one narrative about COVID. So that's an incentive. When you say, why are these people turning on you?
Right.
If Gates money has gone to the tune of like $10 to $12 million for the Guardian, 55 million for COVID education from various sources to the BBC. The New York Times received some of these millions, $1 billion in the last stimulus bill to overcome vaccine hesitancy. Leaving aside the left, but the left is the recipient of most of this, there is a huge vested interest in not ending the pandemic, not questioning vaccines, because that will go away. And lastly, I just want to make a final point about religiousness and power. I definitely was lonely in the Obama years as well, and so were people like Glenn Greenwald, because we continued to sound the alarm about tyranny, whether it's not closing Guantanamo or, being a kill list of American citizens. But the left is horrible when they're in power, and they don't want anyone to mess with that. So they will silence you, just speak up for the Constitution, because they don't want to lose the power that they have by holding anyone on the left accountable. So, yippee, they're completely in power. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. They don't want people like me and Glenn Greenwald saying, hey, wait a minute, you are, ripping up the Constitution. You're shredding our human rights. It violates the Fourth Amendment to have a vaccine passport, and so on. The last thing I'm going to say, and I'll really stop, is that there's real cult thinking going on, and I think it's
yes, ma'am.
And it's scary, and people I love have been harmed by it. I think I'm hearing things from people, thoughtful, intelligent, educated people, that I never thought I would hear, like, A lot of people are saying, don't talk to me about it. Don't show me the evidence. Don't,
Yes.
Or insane things like, well, most scientists don't agree, or the CDC says you're wrong. These are like journalists.
Yep.
These are, graduate.
I know. I've seen the same thing
Right.
All throughout my life. I want to make sure we get to two things before we close the interview. Specifically about COVID passports, which we've seen discussed. The New York Times basically ran an advertorial that it called a news story last week that was plumping for this.
Sorry.
That scares me badly, and it scares me that it does not scare people that I love and respect. What happens, let's say that happens. Let's say that we get vaccine passports like New York State is doing and that spreads. What's the next step after that? And the second part of that question is, how do we fight this? How do we get hurt?
Well, I'm going to answer the second part first because I have an answer. As CEO of a tech company that builds digital platforms, Daily Cloud, I understood early what the danger was with vaccine passports. And I did a video that people can see that was very viral, explaining that it's not going to be just your vaccine status. This seamlessly integrates PayPal, Apple Pay, Google Wallet. It can turn you off and on so that you no longer can participate in society, as happened in Israel. And I think that's one reason I've been deplatformed too, is that so many people listened to me and took seriously my warning as a tech about that technology. So we started a solution, which is called the 5 Freedoms Campaign. It's on my site, dailyclout.io. And we asked a lawyer to draft 5 bills for 5 freedoms, and one of them is no vaccine passports. The others are no mask mandates, no emergency law, open schools now, and freedom of assembly. So we've been very successful, even in a short amount of time. Hundreds and hundreds of people have signed up, thousands of people. And we've been invited to speak to state legislators and we went in Maine, in Michigan, in Oregon, and state legislators are passing these bills. I mentioned I was deplatformed. Senator Kim Thatcher of Oregon was in the act of trying to pass a bill based on the draft bill to ban vaccine passports that we put out there and told people, contact your reps, got to pass these laws at the state level to protect us. So we've had victories. Pennsylvania just passed all of the 5 freedoms. Basically, they ended an emergency law. They banned vaccine passports. Florida's banned vaccine passports through a governor's edict.
Yep.
And there are victories across the country, but that is our only hope. It's not going to happen at the federal level because
sounds like we may have lost your audio. I think you're coming back.
Oh, sorry. Did you hear what I was saying about banning vaccine passports at the state level and Daily Clout leading?
Yeah, I think that your point is that this is going to have to be an effort by the states because we can't expect this from the federal government.
Yes, but I want to say more affirmatively, it has been a very successful fight. We're in the middle of it, but we've had a number of remarkable successes pushing back at the state level, New Hampshire as well. So if people listening care about that in their state, they need to join us at dailyclout.io or just get them to their state legislators. But it needs,
and that's the best place to find this. Your website is dailyclout.io.
Right. And the campaign is 5 Freedoms.
5 Freedoms. Excellent. Naomi, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for paying attention to these issues, and thank you for talking about them publicly. And today, thank you for talking about them with us. I wish you good luck.
So much for caring. Let's save our Constitution together across every political divide. Take care. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care. We're going to take a break and come back with more, folks. Stay with us. Thanks so much for listening. Would you take just a minute right now and share our show on social media? On Disaffected, we take a close look every week at the abuse dynamics exploding in the dark and disordered world that we live in. Tell other people about us. And when you subscribe, hit that notification bell and stay with us in real time as we take a new close look every week and examine how to identify and contend with the abuse dynamics at play in the world around us. Okay, so I want to close this show by asking you to think about a few things. And if you come up with something interesting, if you want to share some thoughts, send me an email. You can find us on our website, which is disaffected.fm. You can find our email link there, and our email address is us@disaffected.fm. You can also find all of our audio and all of our video and subscribe, and also donate to support the show. Somebody showed up in the live chat of the comments when we did our premiere of the show last week, and made a typical comment of certain kinds of people. And this person said, you know, you'd really be a lot more effective if you weren't so obsessed with this trans thing. Try to find another angle. No. You're obsessed with insert your favorite thing. Trans, misogyny, cluster B, whatever it is. You're obsessed is an attempt to make a commentator look unstable, deranged, having a peculiar and inexplicable personal problem that causes him to focus on something that doesn't deserve as much attention as he's giving to it. So it's a form of shut up. But it's not an uncommon kind of pushback. And I'm going to be talking about the trans issue on many more episodes of this show. Why am I so interested in it? I've said this before, but I believe that modern trans activism and trans ideology is the best example we have right now of the takeover of personality disordered thinking and personality disordered ways of relating to the world that is the topic of this entire show. I think there is nothing more clearly lunatic than the contemporary idea that nice, respectable people have, that there are people who were born in the wrong body, that there were a lot more of them than we ever knew, that they include children down to 18 months old, and that giving them hormones and surgery is the way to treat them and to give them health care. I don't think there's anything more lunatic than that. And I'm right. And the people who can't see it have made a choice not to see it because it's very, very difficult to wake up from a line of cult thinking, and that's what this is. It is absolutely enforced. I mean, it's not cult in a small way. It's not a small group of people. That is the mainstream point of view that you are supposed to have if you are a nice, respectable, liberal person. And I'm obsessed with it because of its harm to children, primarily. That is the worst and most heinous aspect of this, but also because of the terrible damage that it is doing to the lesbian and gay community internally, putting us at war with each other, and also lowering our credibility and rolling back some of the progress that we have made in actual legitimate struggles for legal rights. So I want to ask you to think about a couple of things. I see this a lot lately. We need to separate true trans people from the ones who are fakers. Who is truly trans? Who are the fakers? And how do you tell the difference? And this is what I mean. Actually, we have to take a step back. Before we define who is truly trans, we need to define what trans is. And we have not defined it. You may think you've defined it, but when you say that word, other people are hearing something that is coming off a script in their own head. We are using the same words, but we do not share meanings. But we are pretending that we share meanings. This is dangerous. It not only misleads us in conversation, but it sets us up to have fights with each other when we don't actually know what it is we are fighting over. So what is trans? What is it to you? Can you articulate it? Can you be specific? And I do mean specific. You can't use the word trans to define trans, right? You have to use other words. You can't give circular definitions. What does it mean to you? Some people say people who are truly trans are those who have gender dysphoria. Okay. Gender dysphoria is just a very modern, just the past few years, renaming of something called gender identity disorder. Dysphoria merely means unhappiness. but there are connotations to that word. When we say gender dysphoria, we don't just think unhappiness. We think unhappiness of a singular kind, of singular severity, incomparable to any other kind of human suffering, and never before experienced by humans who are not trans. It's ridiculously inflated. I absolutely acknowledge that there are people out there who have something that we call gender dysphoria. They have been led to believe that there is something wrong with their body. They've been led to believe that they should have been born the sex that they were not born, and they suffer psychologically because of this delusion. That's real. But I don't believe that they have a singularly perverse and deep suffering that is so extreme that no one else can intuit what it might feel like, that it has no connection to any other kind of human suffering where we might be able to find actual empathy with each other. I think that is a manipulation. I think it's very convenient for people who want to make this conversation off limits, because if they can construct the idea in our heads of the uber and suffering trans person who is so fragile that the slightest perturbation or the slightest invalidation will send them suicidal, well, it's a wonderful way to shut people up, isn't it? And that's why they do it. So what is trans? What is truly trans? There are people who believe they're the opposite sex. There are people who say, I won't be happy unless I get hormones. I won't be happy unless I can have genital surgery, unless I can have a mastectomy. Those people exist. But are they trans? What does that mean? No one is born in the wrong body. That is an example of something that is not even wrong. You may have heard that phrase before, not even wrong. I think it was attributed first to a German physicist. And there's a book, I think, by a mathematician of that title. It basically means it's so nonsensical, it's not even wrong, because there isn't a possibility that it could be right. It makes no sense. The idea of trans, the idea that there is a woman inside of a male body or a man inside of a woman's body is so ludicrous that it's not even wrong. Philosophically, logically, we're talking at base levels of how humans construct meaning. It's not possible to be born in the wrong body, because we are our bodies. This is me. This male body that I have, this is me. The brain, with its emergent property of consciousness that we don't really understand, that's me. I am an embodied physical person. You are an embodied physical person. I can't be born in the wrong body because I am my body. That doesn't mean that there can't be distress. There certainly is distress. But to say it means that you're trans, you truly are the other sex but in the wrong sexed body, doesn't even make logical sense on a basic level. And why are people concerned about making sure we distinguish true trans, they say, from the fakers? Because I think it comes from a place of compassion, but it's misguided compassion. And it's compassion that, when practiced, actually causes people harm. They believe that we have to identify the so-called true trans people because they actually do need treatment. They do genuinely have a medical need for cross-sex hormones. They need to be affirmed by society and by a surgeon's knife that they are the sex that they want to be. Because if they don't, they're going to kill themselves. Bullshit. First of all, there's no evidence of that. Yes, this is a population that is severely psychiatrically unstable. It astonishes me when people talk about, well, we should screen to make sure that they don't have comorbid mental health conditions. The state of claiming that you are trapped in the wrong body is itself the morbidity. That is the mental health condition. Don't speak of it as if there's some such thing as a perfectly stable, rational person with a normal personality structure, a normal ego structure, and a normal ability to self-soothe, validate, and regulate emotions, who just happens to be born in the wrong body. No. That doesn't make sense. And even if you're on the fence and that made you bristle a little bit, I've had this conversation enough with people. I know you know that too. And it's okay to admit it. If we keep these treatments available, right? Because we believe people need it. Would you change your mind if you knew what the actual outcome was for people who go through so-called sex change surgery, gender confirmation surgery? There are a lot of studies out there, and most of them are crap. They're very badly done. They might track people from pre-transition to post-surgery, but then half of the people in the study are lost to follow-up, meaning they could not contact them. They don't know if they're dead or alive. They don't know if they persisted in their trans identification. These are worthless. There's only one that I know of, and if you know of others, please send me an email, because I do want to be accurate about this. There's only one I know of that was well constructed and actually followed through. It was published in 2011, and it's a Swedish study. Think, after I tell you this, about whether you really believe these so-called treatments are something that we need to make sure are kept available. The title of this study is Long-Term Follow-Up of Transsexual Persons Undergoing Sex Reassignment Surgery, Cohort Study in Sweden, published February 22nd, 2011, in the journal, I think it is PLOS 1, but I didn't take a specific note. If you Google for that title, you'll find it. It's a Swedish study, long-term follow-up of transsexual persons, et cetera, et cetera. Here's what they found. They tracked several hundred transsexuals, people who had been all the way through sex change surgery. And it was a rigorous study. They had a control group of people who did not receive any treatment, just people from the background population who were matched by sex to the people in the cohort. And what they found was that the rate of suicide, death by suicide, in the transsexuals is 20 times the rate of the background population. 20 times more people who had sex change surgery killed themselves than you find in the background population. Does that change what you think about this? Does it change your belief that if that young woman who claims she's a man can't hold herself together, can't stand to hear a wrong pronoun, that if she gets her breasts removed, if she gets a fake penis constructed from the skin on her arm, that she'll be happy after that? I think we need to pay attention to this evidence. But frankly, common sense will tell you that you cannot treat a diseased mind by maiming the body. This is a disorder of the mind. The suffering that many of these people have is very real suffering. There is no lack of compassion on the part of people like me who are critical of transgender ideology. We think this is horrific. We think it is brutality masked as compassion. So that's what I have to say about that. This has been kind of a long show. Thank you for joining me as always, and I'll see you next time. Go to patreon.com/disaffected. Thank you. Thanks so much for listening. Would you take just a minute right now and share our show on social media? On Disaffected, we take a close look every week at the abuse dynamics exploding in the dark and disordered world that we live in. Tell other people about us.